When I ask the question, how well is it working? I'm not asking, did you or didn't you hit this target, right? I'm inviting the good and the bad. I'm asking really what worked well, what didn't work well, right? And so that is the change that, puzzle setting and puzzle solving brings in over goal setting.
Today, I am excited to welcome Radhika Dutt to the show. Now, we had a lot of fun on this talk. In this conversation, it's actually a little bit longer than a normal Gemba Academy podcast, but because the conversation was pretty deep and really a lot of fun to do. So Radhika has a belief that what some call OKRs or objectives and key results really aren't the way that companies should sort of operate or the type of framework that should be used. Instead, she proposes a system that focuses more on objectives, hypotheses, and learnings. Now, if you're been in the lean world for a little while, you're probably shaking your head up and down like, right, that's scientific thinking, right? What we're trying to do with Mike Rother's Toyota Kata framework. And so during this conversation, we kept kind of going back and forth, and she was proposing her thoughts, and then I was sort of weaving in what we think about when we're practicing scientific thinking, or what Mike Rother and team would call Toyota Kata, the framework. And so again, I don't think they're perfectly or exactly aligned, and I think there are some things that Radhika is proposing that might be a little bit different, but I think overall there's tremendous harmony between sort of the approaches that because in the end my proposition to her was that what we're trying to do within the lean world is learn our way forward, right? That's really what we're doing when we're setting target conditions and experimenting against obstacles that are in our way towards where we want to be. We're just constantly learning, and that there's no real failure. Now, where she kind of brought in some really interesting ideas is like, well, what if you're just sort of going in a completely wrong direction? And that's very fair, because within scientific thinking, if we're going in the wrong direction and even being successful, if you will, and hitting target conditions, but we're not doing what sort of our customer or the world wants, then why are we doing it, right? So I think there's a lot to learn and reflect on. Again, this is a little bit longer, so maybe listen to it in a few different chunks, but it's a really good one, and I appreciate Radhika for taking the time to visit with us. So show notes can be found over at gembapodcast.com. This is episode 615. Again, gembapodcast.com, and look for episode 615. Okay, enough for me. Let's get to the show. Radhika, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, Ron.
Yeah, my pleasure. Where are you calling in from?
I'm based in Boston.
In Boston. Okay. All right. Lovely part of the country. So, I'm excited for today's conversation. As you know, we like to begin all of our episodes with our guest sharing a quote. So what do you got?
So here's my favorite one, and I only found it this year. The quote goes, "We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." I so love that quote, right? Because, just to think about like, how often do we have time to reflect? But that's the biggest piece of how we learn.
I like it. Say it again.
We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience.
Yeah, I like that. In our lean world, there's a term we refer to as honsai, and it has a sense of deep reflection and learning. And in some way, the formal definition is like more of like almost like a repentance, but it's not necessarily negative per se, but it's just a deep understanding of what has been.
Yeah.
So I like it. I like it. All right. Well, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your background and your line of work that you're in today.
Yeah. So my background is that I started off as an engineer. I did electrical engineering at MIT. That was way back when, finished in 2000. And since then, I got into the startup world. So our first startup was something we started right out of our dorm rooms at MIT. And that sounds all glamorous and great, right? Except the reality is we made a ton of mistakes. we really just made so many of the mistakes that I see now in the startup world anyway. So one example I'll give you is the product disease I now call hero syndrome, right? Which is where we didn't have a clear vision. Like our vision was revolutionizing wireless. And I still don't know what that really meant, right? And so it was all about going big and scaling, etc., without really knowing what problem were we setting out to solve. And there were other such product diseases that I ran into early in my career that I'd caught these product diseases. And over time in my career, as I gained more experience, I built an intuition for how do you avoid these product diseases to build better products. And I was part of 5 acquisitions, 2 of which were my own startups. But, along the way, like the big question that came to me was, is it that we're all doomed to learning these hard lessons from just trial and error? Or can we create a systematic step-by-step guide for how do you build these world-changing products? And how do you systematically translate vision into action instead of just iterating and iterating without this clear sense of direction, which is often the trap we fall into, by the way, in terms of continuous improvement, the iterations without a clear direction. Mm-hmm. And so that was the topic of my first book, Radical Product Thinking, which is behind me. And that came out in 2021. And what I'm working on now is my next book, which is about why goals and targets and OKRs, why they backfire, and what actually works instead. And it's very related to continuous improvement.
Okay. So just in case to level set and make sure everybody's on the same page, you mentioned OKR. Let's start with definitions just of OKR. Yes. I think everybody knows, but you never want to presume.
No, and in fact, you're lucky if you don't know. So OKRs stand for Objectives and Key Results. And it's a methodology for goal setting that was introduced by billionaire VC John Doerr in 2018. And Larry Page talks about it as the secret to Google's success. So there's all this momentum behind OKRs, but the reality is that I've found and also done research to see that OKRs don't actually work all that well, but neither does goal setting in general.
Okay, that's super interesting. So let's just go why? Like, why do you think that's a really strong, passionate statement? Some people are listening like, what is she talking about? Because many people, have, sort of annual objectives or breaking out into quarterly buckets or whatever it might be. And so your belief is that those don't work. So tell me more.
Yeah. So here's what happens with goals, targets, OKRs, whatever you want to call the methodology. But when you set goals and targets, what really happens is the incentive you're creating for your team is to show you the numbers that you want to see, that you hope to see. And so what happens? In the team, they're looking for those positive numbers to show that growth, to show, what's working well. Whereas what you really want in the team is you want them to look at those bad numbers, to look at the bad numbers and play detective and go like, what is happening there, right? Is that a problem? Is it an opportunity? But when you have goals and targets, the desire, like the just subconscious desire even, is to please you, but to also not please you, but like to look like the high performer. And so you're even subconsciously looking out for the positive numbers and you want to ignore the bad numbers, right? We see this often in organizations, and I'm going to give an example from my own experience, but like I see this in so many quotes. So one example of a quote is, I start working with a team and they'll say to me, how do we frame these metrics for management? Another example is where, at the end of every month, when I work with teams, I see, everyone is like working on spinning numbers to be able to show OKRs and show red, green, or yellow. And a lot of it is spinning numbers, right? So that I can show the right thing in that meeting. So I see that very often. But even Andy Grove at Intel, he often talked about how, when you have a leadership team, you're really the last to know, that you don't get the real information from the trenches. So one of the things that Andy Grove would do is he never had a corner office. He had a cubicle, a standard size cubicle like everyone else, because he wanted people to tell them the truth. And if you look at his entire philosophy, a lot of it is based on, how do I get people to experiment, learn, and adapt and tell me the truth about what's really going on? So this whole philosophy of actually just setting targets and these goals, you start to see, what you hope to see. And that's why leadership is the last to know.
Are you familiar with Mike Rother's work in Toyota Kata? It's really big in our lean world. Are you familiar with his work?
I am to some extent, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah,
and
so
what
I want to
resonates
bounce
for you.
his framework off of you to see what you think of it. So in this, and I'm really generalizing this. So apologies to all the Toyota Kata fanatics out listening right now. And Ron, you just said it wrong. So he would propose that we sort of begin with setting what he would call a challenge of like a really long sort of a vision of where we want to be, whatever it could be. I mean, it could be a weight loss journey, for example. If someone's got like vastly overweight and they're setting this really, I want to lose 50 pounds or something like that. Okay. So this is our challenge, but that in of itself is intimidating and just overwhelming. And we just, oh my gosh, what do I do? I don't even know where to begin. So many people would just give up right after a day or two. So then his belief then is to set what we would call a target condition. Okay. And so this could just be like, where could we be not necessarily even weight. It's just like, where could we be within a few weeks or something just much more attainable. Right. And then you'd begin to sort of experiment your way forward towards this target condition. And then once you get to the target condition, you say, oh, great, we made a target. We had a little success. And again, maybe you haven't even lost weight yet, but you've moved your way forward. And then we set another target condition, another small, milestone. And then eventually 6 months, a year, whatever, you look up and you're like, wow, look how far we've come. So we've sort of iterated and learned our way forward, overcoming all these obstacles. And, and again, I'm really generalizing the methodology, but like, what do you think about like that sort of framework?
Yeah. A lot of this philosophy of breaking down a big goal into smaller milestones, right? We hear that often. The only thing, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? The only thing I shy away from is how we apply these ideas in the corporate world. So what happens in the corporate world is not just that you're setting target conditions, it's this mentality of measuring people against those targets. And if you look at kind of how John Doerr talks about it, right, he goes like, well, setting targets makes it really simple. I can tell, have you or haven't you achieved this goal? Right. And so let's take this weight loss example. Mm-hmm. When you start thinking with that mindset of setting a target condition that is a smaller win that you could look forward to, right? But if you ask this sort of a binary question, have you or haven't you hit this target condition? What if the answer is no? It's discouraging. What have you learned from that? Like, this is what I see in sales, for example, right? Very often, if you haven't hit the number, it's not about this reflection of what happened. What do we do differently? What have we learned from this, right? Targets force us into this mindset of, well, either you're hitting the target and therefore you feel like, phew, I can relax, or you're not hitting the target and then there is either frantic activity or you sort of freeze and go like, this isn't working anyway. These are the two behaviors I see, right? And it sounds like it resonates for you.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But I guess the counter I would give in our framework would be like, if you didn't sort of achieve this, let's just say that my first target condition for my weight loss journey is that I want to, and it could be an activity. Like I want to come up and meet with a dietitian to come up with a meal plan. And I want to have it done by Friday. And so then what do I need to do to that? Well, I got to research, and next thing you know, you look up and let's say you didn't hit it on Friday, but I'm Friday and I didn't get it done. Okay. So I got to sort of move it out a little bit or something like that. So it's not necessarily, I would say, like a binary on or off, pass or fail. It is, did we get it? If not, or maybe it's more, let's just say I want to lose 1 pound. Let's just say we go that direction.
Yeah.
And we gained a pound. It's like, oh my gosh, not only did we not lose a pound, we gained a pound. I'm a failure. Well, no, it'd be like, well, what did we learn? And that's kind of the framework behind this methodology. Is it's one to learn our way forward. So not necessarily a binary on or off. So it might be that we're saying similar things. I don't know.
Yeah. So in fact, I think, so let me propose for you what I'm writing about in terms of what is the solution if I say goals and OKRs and targets don't work. And I think this is going to resonate for you in terms of this continuous learning mindset, right? And the learning aspect. So the way I think about it is, instead of a goal-driven mindset, it's a puzzle-driven mindset, right? And so when I say puzzle, what I mean by that is, instead of goals, we're thinking about setting the puzzle and then solving the puzzle. So let's talk about setting the puzzle. So in an organization, right, if you're, I talked about sales. Let's take the sales example. Mm-hmm. You would typically set the sales target as achieve X million, ARR by the end of this year. And, if you were doing this target conditions, you might do like a quarterly target, right? Mm-hmm. But let's take a different way of thinking about it. I'm going to set a puzzle for sales. And yes, it might be that, we really need to get to this target by the end of this year, that we want to get to this revenue number by the end of the year. But I see a puzzle in front of us. And here's the puzzle. In the last 3 years, we were growing, but I'm seeing sales plateauing. Mm-hmm. So what might be going on? And here are some guiding questions. As a leader, things I genuinely don't know the answers to. Mm-hmm. Right? So one, maybe it's that there's something that's fundamentally shifted in the market, that maybe there's a competitor that's come along, or there's a change in the market. Yeah, exactly. That, something has basically shifted so fundamentally that we haven't really caught up. Two, maybe it's that we were selling to the early adopter and our message and our approach to selling to the mass market is really not working. Or it might be that maybe our product was working for the early adopter, but it's not really meeting the needs of the mass market. And as a leader, I'm really asking these open questions, things that we want to explore into that problem statement that I mentioned, where we grew for the last 3 years, but we're starting to plateau. And now there might be different pieces of this that different teams take away. The sales might take away the sales piece of the puzzle. The product team might take away the product piece of the puzzle. Manufacturing might have a different piece of the puzzle, right? And we all go off, and then we can work on our puzzles. So, it's similar to breaking down this big problem into smaller pieces, but it's puzzle-based. Now we've set the puzzle and we've aligned, hopefully, through all of these questions on what is happening, what do we need to explore and figure out answers to, right? The second step is then solving this puzzle. And when it comes to solving, again, I think this will resonate for you because the focus is on learning. And so in solving the puzzle, it means asking 3 questions. So the first question is, how well did it work? So whatever your first attempt was, how well did it work? And so let's take the sales example, right? Let's say I tried out new messaging because my messaging was working for early adopters, but maybe I'm not getting enough leads at this point as I approach this bigger market. Right? And so I test out this messaging, and my question is, how well did it work? And ta-da, it turned out that is working well. It looks like I'm getting more meetings with decision makers. Now comes the second question. The second question is, what did we learn? In this question, I look at, okay, so I'm getting meetings with these decision makers, but what's happening? It turns out that, there's a different group in the mass market that also is part of the decision maker that we had never, ever talked to before. So now we've learned that we also need to address their thinking, get them on our side. Now comes the third question. Based on how well it worked and what you learned, what will you try next? If you had a magic wand, what will you try next? And so now I'm going to plan my adaptation based on these learnings. And so this is where I'd say, okay, how am I going to address this additional group beyond the decision maker? Maybe I'm going to do webinars for them to get them on board. Maybe it's stuff that they can easily forward, the decision making can forward. And, this is a way of getting them quickly on board without having to spend all this extra effort. So this is the framework for puzzle setting and then puzzle solving. And I call it OHLA, objectives for setting the puzzle, and you summarize the puzzle, hypotheses, learnings, and adaptation for solving the puzzle, which you saw in these three questions that really create structure and scaffolding for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, and in fact, I would say it's very similar to sort of what we're trying to do when we, Mike Rother would call his framework scientific thinking, and it's how companies like Toyota operate. This is what Toyota leaders are doing. They're basically breaking down the problem. What's the target condition? What's the actual condition now? And then we identify obstacles that are preventing us from reaching the target condition. And then we experiment our way forward against those obstacles, right? And so I feel like maybe we're saying very similar things, just using maybe different words or different terminology. Would you agree?
I definitely think so. I think the ideas are very, very similar, right? I think a lot of what I have seen is the principles are very similar, but sometimes using different vocabulary and a shared vocabulary makes things more accessible.
Mm.
So let's talk about the psychological aspect of this, right? Because the scientific method has been around for hundreds of years at this point. And
yeah, and we would say scientific thinking isn't the scientific method. They are clearly different, but there's harmony. There's synergy, if you will, between them, but they are not the same. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more, but maybe and before we go there, let's talk about sort of why this vocabulary of puzzles, because we never talk about this puzzle-based approach in business. What is really entrenched in our minds is goals, and we need to set goals. We need to set targets. And this is the same vocabulary we're using, even in this continuous learning. But what I found, right, is this whole mindset of goals sort of detracts from what we need to do and the learning, the focus on the learning. Why do I say that? So if you look at kind of how goal setting has come about, OKRs sounds like it's new from 2018 when John Doerr and Larry Page talked about it, right? But if you look at history, actually, it turns out that OKRs were something instituted by Andy Grove at Intel in the late 1970s. Then you go back to, well, where did Andy Grove get this from? And it turns out it's from Peter Drucker's ideas in 1940s, and he just tweaked it a little bit. And if you go back all the way to 1940s and say, okay, what problem was Peter Drucker solving? It turns out that it was in manufacturing. And in the 1940s, the idea was, the problem was that he was working with General Motors. The workforce was primarily working on repetitive tasks. There was very little automation at the time. And in that case, it was very easy to tell that Andy was a better performer than Bob because he installed 45 tires, whereas Bob did 40. And there's only one right way to do tires or to install tires, right? And so in that case, goals worked really well. And that was when it was revolutionary in the 1940s. And what is interesting is that historically, he had tried to get GM to adopt these ideas, but GM didn't like it. So he actually went to Japan, and a lot of the automotive manufacturers, they saw this and they said, yes, let's do this. So in fact, a lot of the Japanese manufacturers started using this goal-based approach, and which is why you're seeing this target vocabulary in manufacturing, and it got into Toyota's, lean thinking, etc. Continuous improvement.
To ask a bold question, are you proposing that Toyota's system is not sort of scalable to other groups outside of manufacturing?
No, not at all. On the contrary, I think the continuous learning part is super important. And I think their approach obviously works, right? The continuous learning part. What I am actually saying is, this mentality of targets in the corporate world, like if you think about how that is implemented and how we're actually using this, if you think about how short term our view has gotten, right? The way we implement or the way we achieve targets, it's about constant short term thinking to hit one target after the other. I'd promised this example from my career. I was working at a company called Avid. And again, a sales example. we were hitting all of our targets. What was Avid doing? We were big in the movie industry. We made video editors. Every movie ever edited that was winning an Oscar at the time in 2000s was edited using Avid.
Mm-hmm.
We were huge. We were hitting all of our targets. So if you looked at the numbers, you would say, wow, we're doing really well. But what happened? It turned out Apple and Adobe was eroding our low end. Our mid-tier was being eroded too. The way we were hitting our targets was by moving further and further into the high end. So going back to what is missing from continuous learning, what should we have done? We should have looked at the good and the bad numbers. We should have learned from, okay, the market is really getting commoditized in video editing. We can make revenues until it won't work anymore in the high end by just pursuing the high end. Mm-hmm. How should we actually address the movie industry? What should we do? Is it based on selling video editors, or should we adapt? Right? And that is the piece that didn't happen. We kept pouring money into more and more high-end stuff, we poured more money into the low end too, into acquiring a company to be able to have low-end video editors. But that was not the right answer. The learning part, the reflection, that was what was missing, right? Mm. And that is because the focus on targets makes us feel like if we're hitting targets, yay, we're doing well. Let's keep doing more of it. If we're not hitting targets, is this frantic activity or this freeze?
Yeah.
This is what I want to change from by introducing this mentality of puzzles, because puzzles give you this feeling of curiosity. Right? This is an experiment I do often. And maybe for our listeners, we can try this experiment and you can try it live for me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask 2 questions. Just think about what feelings are triggered for you with those 2 questions. Mm-hmm. So here's the first question. Just think about how you feel.
Okay.
What goals do you want to achieve for your organization this year? What goals? And here's the second question. What puzzles do you want to solve for your company this year? What's the difference in the feelings that are triggered for you?
Mm-hmm. Maybe with the puzzles, it's maybe taps it more into sort of like curiosity or something like this, maybe, versus, I guess the first part is just like kind of a linear, what do I need to do?
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Goals trigger this left brain thinking of what do I need to do? But also, right, it is often task driven based on previous years. It is driven by like, oh, what numbers did I set last year? What were the goals last year? And then recalling that and then saying, what do I need to do this year, right? Whereas puzzles, what a lot of people in my workshops say is, it comes from this feeling of internal drive, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, but it's my internal drive. It's not someone else making me do it. And puzzles, therefore, taps into this natural energy that we have because it's from this internal drive. Nobody else is making me do this. I really want to do this for the company. And that is what I want to tap into, right? Instead of hitting goals, it's about continuous learning, the internal drive that drives better results. But also by creating the scaffolding that I talked about, the 3 questions of how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we do next? As a leader, that gives you more sense of both control, but the ability to course correct, because I can see what is actually happening from the trenches. When I ask the question, how well is it working? I'm not asking, did you or didn't you hit this target? Right? I'm inviting the good and the bad. I'm asking really what worked well, what didn't work well, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is the change that puzzle setting and puzzle solving brings in over goal setting.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think that I'm going to send you a copy of Mike's book because I think that it would resonate with you, because I feel like we are saying very similar things, because within the scientific thinking framework, there is a sense of experimentation. Really, I would say that's like more of like a scientist, where you're sort of, you set a goal, and you make a prediction of what you actually think's going to happen. And then you run the experiment, and then you see what actually happened, and then you compare what actually happened to what did I think was going to happen, and then you you ask, what did I learn? So this is this continuous loop of learning our way forward. I don't know how else to say it. So,
Yeah.
I don't, what do you think of that?
There's a really interesting point that you just brought up, right? That we come up with a goal and a prediction, and then we experiment, right? But here's the challenge that I have found, and I'm going to give you an example of this. When you set this goal and a prediction, sometimes we don't stay in the problem space long enough. We haven't understood the problem long enough, and we've decided what the prediction or the hypothesis is. And therefore, we jump into the solution and therefore an experiment and learning from that experiment. So let me share how this sort of played out. So I was working with this company where they were in the maritime, or I still am, but like 2 years ago, I started with this company in the maritime industry.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a data platform for the maritime industry that helps you match which shipping vessels are best for which cargo so that you can maximize profits. Sounds brilliant. Their product was so accurate. Like you would say, why isn't this changing the industry? Why isn't everyone lining up to use this? And what we were seeing was, it's really interesting, but only the tech savvy users were using this product.
Mm.
So instantly we moved to a prediction and a goal. We said, aha, if it's the tech savvy users that are using our product and they're making lists, then, right, our hypothesis was, let's just make creating lists super easy so that the tech averse people will use it. Let's just make lists super easy to filter. We'll make filtering much simpler. All sounds perfectly rational, right? Like you can't find fault with it, could you?
Mm.
Yeah. Sounds rational, sounds like, there's the right prediction. And we experimented, we tried it out, and it wasn't working.
And what did you learn?
We were learning that, the filtering wasn't making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But we weren't really learning much more from that experiment. Mm-hmm. So what did we need to do? We had to go back all the way to the problem space, right? We had to stop the experiments for a moment. Let's just go talk to users with an open canvas, with a blank canvas, and really understand, how do they think? What's going on? How do you actually work today? Mm-hmm. We had to understand the puzzle. What we were doing with the experiment and the filtering was, it's like we had looked at this Rubik's Cube and we had just jumped to trying to solve it. But it turned out this is a different Rubik's Cube. That it's a very twisted version. We couldn't just apply the same algorithms we already knew, right? Mm-hmm. So my point is, when you think about it like a puzzle, the first step is understand the puzzle well enough, define the puzzle well enough so that you can actually see that puzzle well enough so that your first attempt is the most useful possible. But even your experiments sometimes don't tell you enough. Your experiments can focus on the local maximum as opposed to finding the global maximum. If we had just focused on improving the filtering, it's sort of, it was fine. It would have made it slightly better, right? It did make it slightly better, but it didn't lead to a dramatically better and huge improvement. It did make it better, but this is the point. Sometimes with continuous improvement, you can end up with a local maximum as opposed to a global maximum if you don't think about it as a puzzle and truly understand the puzzle.
Got it. So you're not a fan of OKRs, clearly. So tell me then about, from researching your work, I understand you're more of a proponent of what we would call an OHL. So talk about an OHL then. So
I used to call it OHL. Now I call it OHLA. OHLA is easier to say and it rolls off the tongue. Okay. And basically OHLA is this framework for puzzle setting and puzzle solving. Okay. So the objective is what you use to summarize the puzzle, right? So when I remember that sales example, or, we can even look at this maritime example where we were setting the puzzle. So the problem statement was, only tech-savvy users are using our product. Some guiding questions, like now if we go back to that puzzle setting model, we should have asked more questions about that. Why are only tech-savvy brokers, and by the way, it was mostly brokers who were using our product, like, why are only tech-savvy brokers in the maritime using this? Why aren't other people in other roles, the not brokers, but like, people who are fixing vessels, why aren't other people who are tech averse using this product?
Mm-hmm.
Then understanding their mental models, like, how do those people actually work? How do they go about their day? These are, now it sounds like it's basic questions,
Mm-hmm.
but this is the reality. In most companies, when you start to define the puzzles and you describe a problem statement, and then you ask these questions, it's like, wait a minute, I don't know these answers, but why don't I know them? It's okay. Like, this is the first thing. As a leader, it's okay to be vulnerable and talk about these questions that you don't know answers to. Puzzle setting and this framework and mindset of puzzles makes you realize that it's okay to not have the answers. If we all knew the answers, it's not a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fundamental mindset shift. So first you ask all of these guiding questions, like, how do these people think? How are they different from tech-averse brokers? What do these people need instead? And now I summarize the objective. And that summary is, how do I solve this puzzle and address the needs of the tech-averse people in other roles so that we can grow as a company? That's the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the objective. And it sounds like an OKR sort of objective, except now it's a puzzle that I've framed, right? And then the hypotheses, learnings, adaptations. It's basically the three questions that I talked about. How well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next if we had a magic wand?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the framework.
Mm-hmm. Got it. No, I think that there's actually good harmony. Maybe it's not exactly, but I feel like it is very similar to what we're preaching and what companies like Toyota, and it's not just Toyota. I mean, my company, like, we're practicing this framework of learning our way forward, and it works. I mean, I'll just tell you, it works extremely well. It's not easy though, and there's a lot of bumps along the way because you run experiments and you make sort of predictions, and it doesn't work anything like we thought it was going. But guess what? That's beautiful. Why? Because we learned,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly.
And as long as we're learning, good things are genuinely going to happen. Now, again, you could be going down a completely wrong path, right? And I think maybe this is what you're saying. If you're experimenting your way in a completely different direction than where the world is going, it doesn't matter, right? Like how good you are at experimenting and all the rest of it. You're going in a wrong direction, right? So this is maybe the tricky part of sort of trying to learn our way forward. You've got to have constant feedback from the world or whatever it is that you're trying to sort of work with.
Exactly. And this is where, sometimes you might experiment, you realize you're not really getting anywhere, or you can see that you're finding a local maximum, but really, that just means you have to go back to the puzzle setting and say, maybe we're thinking about this puzzle incorrectly. And that's what we had to do at this company Signal a couple of times. And by the way, in taking this approach to puzzle setting and puzzle solving, right, we drove much better results than with OKRs. So when I started working with a company, sales had plateaued. And that was in 2023. And that was when they were using OKRs. We started using puzzle setting and puzzle solving, and we doubled sales in 2024. We again doubled sales in 2025. And, we also dropped customer churn from 26% to 4%. And this was by applying this puzzle setting, puzzle solving to every part of the product. We use this approach to figure out how do we expand our product to the people who aren't using it, and to figure out, like, how do we make this product better for the people who are using it? And that's what drove this change.
So maybe to finish this conversation up, and this has been super fun. I really appreciate you taking time to visit with us. Talk a little bit about then in a OKR framework. It's very straightforward, sort of, as we've already talked about, sort of like how to measure people's performance, and you hit your number or you didn't, you get a bonus or you don't, right? So talk a little bit about, with your proposed framework, how are we going to sort of, I don't know how to say it, like, measure people?
Yeah. And that's such an important part, right? So let's talk about this new mindset of how to measure people. in the old mindset, we've been so obsessed with quantifying performance. We've wanted to say, okay, you are 5 versus someone else is a 3 or a 4 in
Yeah.
terms of performance, right? But the reality is, the more you put these numbers to a person, the more they feel evaluated and the less they are likely to take feedback. When you think about this mindset of continuous improvement, we want people to continuously improve too. We want to focus on performance development rather than performance evaluation. And so research shows that people are a lot more open to taking feedback and continuous improvement when they aren't constantly feeling evaluated. So why are we so obsessed with numbers that you're a 5, he's a 4, right? And the answer to that is because we're thinking about, well, what if I did a layoff? I want to know, who are the bottom 10% that I fire, right? That's why we want to quantify performance. Let's be honest about that. So when you think about it in that way, you realize, we're just working constantly towards the worst case scenario and killing the continuous learning and continuous development in people. So how do we change that? What I do with teams is I focus on the continuous learning. I am evaluating too, but the focus is more on the development. So for example, when product managers come to me and they're telling me about their product and they are presenting to me information in terms of how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? I get a real sense of how deeply are they thinking about this puzzle, right? When they share with me, what have I learned? If they're just regurgitating numbers and just spitting out numbers that they've collected from the dashboards, it's like, come on, tell me more. I want the story. What have you figured out in terms of the narrative? There was a product manager who came from one of those big companies, Google, Amazon, etc., right? And she was great at optimizing numbers, but I would dig in a couple of details. And then I was realizing that thinking wasn't deep enough, regardless of sort of where her pedigree was from, right? Like it made me realize I need to build a skill set in terms of thinking more deeply about what have you learned from those numbers, right? And then in terms of what are you going to try next? Then I also, again, know how well you're thinking about the puzzle solving. Maybe you're thinking of taking too big a risk. And I would then guide you to say, okay, how about, like the lean startup approach? What is a smaller way we could test this? So, as the team gives you this information, I am evaluating, but I'm constantly working on development. It gives me the true sense of where they are. And in terms of scaffolding, right, it helps me give people what they need. Someone who has less knowledge, skills, and experience, they get more handholding from me because I know the true answer in terms of how they're actually doing with these 3 questions. Someone with a lot more experience, and I can start to see that they're really nailing this puzzle solving. I give them bigger puzzles. Go forth, make it happen, and come back, a month from now when you're done, or 2 months from now. I give them more leeway. So this is how we can use this as leaders to move more towards performance development than obsess over evaluation. Although evaluation is always part of the process, that's not the main thing.
Got it. Wow, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate you, pouring your heart into this topic, and I loved our conversation back and forth. So maybe to wrap things up, I'm wondering if you have any sort of like final words of wisdom or final points that you want to make, and then if you can let everybody know how to best connect with you, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So there's one leader who is at Adidas and who's been using this approach. And, what she shared with me was, as they were setting this puzzle and they were asking these guiding questions, one of the reactions from the team was, wait, shouldn't you already know these answers? It was a vulnerable place to be in. And I faced the same thing, when I was asking those basic questions about how are these users using this product, not just the product, but like, how do they work? How are they thinking, right? They feel like basic questions. So the one tip I would give for leaders is, in being able to be vulnerable and say, we don't always have the answers, but this is the reality that we're in it together in solving the puzzle. You'll find that it is actually more motivating for the team and it is vulnerable for you, But there is also this bonding experience that you're going to find these answers together. And then one last thing in terms of connecting with me, what I'll say is you can download the framework for puzzle setting and puzzle solving. I'm happy to share that for you in the show notes. Just go to radicalproduct.com. Under toolkits, you'll see the OHL's toolkit. And so you can start to use that. And I'm working on my second book, and I'm in the process of writing the book. So as you use this approach, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you're very welcome to share with me your experience. And, it might just make it into the book as a case study. I'm in it with you in terms of continuous learning. And I've truly enjoyed our conversation. I feel like, this adds to the ideas of continuous learning and adds a little bit more scaffolding for all of that creativity. And how do we stay in the problem space more so that we can solve the puzzle better?
Fantastic. Awesome. I really thank you for taking so much time. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. I've loved the conversation.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening. Whether you've been on the continuous improvement journey for many years, or perhaps you're just getting started, Gemba Academy is here to support you. And while we're best known for our more than 1,500 Lean and Six Sigma teaching and virtual tour videos, we also have a team of experienced Lean and Six Sigma practitioners available for one-on-one coaching, as well as a variety of Lean and Six Sigma certification options. To learn more and to schedule a demo, head on over to gembaacademy.com.